Going to be interesting is the parade of celebrities who we expect to be mentioned and or called into that courtroom. You know, people who we hadn't heard about prior, like Mike Myers, you know, Austin Powers, Mike Myers. Why is he getting called? Why is he on the witness list? That'll be fascinating. And then, of course, there are the no-name, quote unquote.
Diddy, like shooting people, blowing up cars. Is he this gangster that behind the scenes is that him? Or is that
Shout out to Wendy Williams.
They said it was nothing more than a heartbreaking accident, a drowning caused by a sudden ocean current that took the life of one of television's most beloved stars, while he was simply enjoying a peaceful family getaway in Costa Rica. But now, only a few weeks later, conversations inside that Manhattan federal courtroom are sparking serious doubts. People are beginning to ask, was Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death really just a tragic twist of fate? Or could it have been a calculated move to cover up something far more sinister?
The stuff that's happening to Wendy Williams, you think this is all connection to?
Of course!
This is where the story takes a chilling turn. New claims coming out of Diddy's trial have opened the door to shocking possibilities, and Malcolm-Jamal Warner's name is suddenly being mentioned in ways no one ever expected. His connection appears tied to that same circle of powerful industry insiders linked to Diddy's so-called social empire. But Warner's involvement doesn't sound like a simple run-in at an awards show. It seems he may have been quietly tangled up in something much deeper, possibly even preparing to reveal it. And then, just like that, he ends up drowning in the ocean, alone, except for one unidentified man who reportedly tried to rescue him and has since vanished into silence.
They once worked together a long time ago. They're not friends now. They don't like each other. And yeah, 50 has taken every shot, especially when Diddy has been down.
Let's take a step back for a moment. July 20th in Playa Grande, Costa Rica, Malcolm-Jamal Warner, 54 years old, out in the ocean. Suddenly, he goes under. Paramedics fight for nearly 20 minutes to bring him back, but nothing works. The official report chalks it up to asphyxiation from drowning. But here's where things take a darker turn. Sources tied to Diddy's legal case are now suggesting that Warner may not have been just a bystander. He could have been a loose end, one that someone didn't want unraveling. That possibility shifts everything. In an instant, this warm-hearted TV brother and Grammy-winning musician goes from beloved icon to potential threat. And the timing makes it even harder to ignore. Just weeks before his final trip, Warner had kicked off season 2 of his podcast, Not All Hood. But this time the tone was different. That first episode was laced with sharp commentary, hints of coded language, and a fiery determination that made it clear he was ready to speak out. We've managed to navigate through the murky waters of child stardom with our souls and dignity intact, he told his co-host Keshia Knight Pulliam. But if you really listen, there's something more in his words, a weight, a tension, the kind that builds when someone is done staying quiet, when a man is preparing to finally say the names out loud.
I hate to bring up the sad news, but news did break today of the untimely passing of Malcolm-Jamal Warner.
I can't believe it.
And then, just like that, he was gone. Those close to the podcast reveal that Warner had already been working on more episodes, ones that pushed into territory he'd never fully addressed before. He was ready to talk about how young talents are groomed into silence, how certain powerful figures control entire careers, and how even actors with Emmy nominations, like himself, had seen friends fall into traps that were anything but accidental. The podcast had only just started to scratch beneath the polished surface when Warner went into that ocean. And now the question hangs in the air. Did the things he was preparing to say make him a target?
People don't really know how much what it does to you when something that you love is taken from you. You're stuck. During those years, you're still stuck 21 years later.
If you talk to a few insiders from the late 90s SNBC scene about Warner's ties to the music world, the reaction is almost always the same, a raised eyebrow. One former road manager for a Los Angeles label claims Warner showed up at more than one gathering at Diddy's LA compound in the early 2000s. He wasn't a fixture there, but he was present enough to notice things. He saw what happened. He didn't participate, but he saw, the source said. Another industry veteran, this one from the BET production side, remembers Warner privately expressing his unease with what he described as weaponized mentorship. According to him, it was a system where promising actors and musicians were lured in with the promise of guidance, only to be kept on a tight leash. None of this, of course, was mentioned in Warner's obituaries. Then there's the strange story of the man who supposedly tried to save him in Costa Rica. A 29-year-old from Nicaragua, no name, no interviews, just a brief statement from the Costa Rican Red Cross saying he was in critical condition after the incident, then released without complications. The story goes like this. He dove in after Warner nearly drowned himself, survived, and then disappeared without a trace. Not one journalist has tracked him down since. Local authorities confirmed he had no personal connection to Warner. So what was he doing there? Early reports said he went for a swim just before sunrise. Later, Warner's body was found hundreds of yards away in a rocky cove, washed up against the shoreline. But here's the part that doesn't sit right with locals. Witnesses who work along Playa Grande say that man was already in the water before the chaos began. He wasn't a passer-by rushing in after hearing screams. He was swimming nearby, watching, maybe even waiting. That paints a very different picture. And the silence since then has only fueled suspicion. Diddy's circle has had nothing to say about Warner's name surfacing in courtroom chatter. No denial, no statement. Nothing, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's meant to close in around the truth. Meanwhile, this so-called free trial is forcing jurors and reporters to confront an ugly idea that entire careers may have been steered, controlled, or crushed in those exclusive, private rooms. If Warner had witnessed even a glimpse of that world firsthand, he would have been more than just a liability. He would have been a symbol, a man with credibility, family values, and a microphone. Early reports from inside the courtroom suggest the judge is leaning on the defense's own words. At one point, Diddy's attorney acknowledged that Sean Combs has a history of violent behavior and volatile personal relationships. The defense argued that didn't prove racketeering, but now the judge appears to be using those admissions as grounds to deny him bail. And while all this unfolds, let's not forget the last public images of Malcolm-Jamal Warner. Just weeks before his death, he was on stage in Atlanta, bass guitar in hand, glowing with energy, smiling as fans surrounded him. That wasn't a man fading into the background. That was a man stepping into the spotlight again. He had a daughter he loved, a wife he shielded, and a legacy he was in the middle of reclaiming, which is why his death doesn't sit right. Drowning might sound like a natural cause, but motives are rarely so neat and tidy. When you look at the patterns, the picture shifts. Diddy's lawyers tried to paint him as someone indulging in private, consensual behavior. But the court wasn't convinced. He's now sitting behind bars because the jury decided his actions crossed the line into criminal territory. If Warner was preparing to revisit what he'd seen, or expose a system that still thrives in the shadows, then his sudden disappearance starts looking less like chance and more like convenience. Then there are the digital breadcrumbs. Warner's final social media posts felt unusually reflective. Close-up photos, nostalgic quotes, even a re-post of an old article on artist burnout. Nothing screamed alarm, but there was a vulnerability in his tone. For a man who had just launched a new podcast and was making plans to mentor younger creators, he sounded like someone either preparing for something or protecting something. Keshia Knight Pulliam, Warner's longtime friend and podcast partner, called him an angel. In her tribute and promise to look after our girls, a reference to their daughters who had grown close over the years. But in another Instagram story, she added a simple line, "I've just needed a moment." Some fans believed that statement carried more weight than grief alone. Was she hinting at something unspoken, trying to process a reality that doesn't fit the official narrative? And all of this leaves us with the same unsettling question. What really happened to Malcolm-Jamal Warner, one of the witnesses in the case? known only by an alias, has been granted full anonymity by the judge. She's testifying behind closed doors, and everyone in the courtroom has been ordered not to reveal a single detail about her identity, not even a description of what she looks like. Meanwhile, another layer of mystery surfaced online. A chilling Reddit thread claimed that a production assistant who worked with Warner back in June said he had been feeling watched. According to the post, Warner was uneasy about certain industry figures suddenly reappearing in his life. The assistant even named one of Diddy's longtime business associates as someone who had reached out to Warner out of nowhere earlier that summer, dangling the promise of a big budget comeback that never materialized. The post disappeared within 24 hours, but screenshots remain. All of this has fueled the belief that Warner may have carried knowledge he had kept buried for years, knowledge he was finally ready to bring to light. But if that's true, he never got the chance. Even without hard proof, the whispers alone have already done damage. They've cracked the illusion wide open. Now, people can't ignore the coincidences, the timing, the connections. What makes it more unsettling is the silence around the mysterious man who tried to rescue Warner. No name, no interviews, no photographs. Just a quiet release from a hospital, and a blank space where his face should be. And it hits hard, because losing someone in this way doesn't just leave grief. It leaves people stuck with unanswered questions, stuck in the pain of knowing something doesn't add up, stuck 21 years later, still replaying it all. Now the questions are only getting louder, not just about the tragic death of Malcolm-Jamal Warner, but about the hidden machinery behind it. Because when you pull back and look at the bigger picture, this was never just about one man and one drowning. It feels connected to something far larger. What we're really looking at here is a decades-long system that has allegedly wrapped itself around Hollywood's throat, choking out ambition, enforcing silence, and punishing anyone who dared to step out of line. Diddy may be sitting behind bars today, but if the allegations hold weight, his empire was never just about one man. It was a network, a web, and every web has others still crawling across its threads. Insiders describe a closed, circle syndicate, gatekeepers operating beneath the surface of both music and film. This wasn't just about influence, it was about control. Young stars weren't simply guided, they were groomed. And once someone was pulled inside that circle, the doors quietly shut behind them. The names not yet listed in court filings are still whispered on film sets, backstage at Grammy rehearsals, and in the shadows of red carpets. If Warner ever tried to push one of those doors back open, especially with a microphone in his hand and a podcast gaining momentum, then his disappearance starts to look less like fate and more like strategy. How many young talents crossed his path? How many others might have shared his fate? And the hardest question of all, how did this machine keep running unchecked for so long? Because the truth is uncomfortable. Even if Diddy is locked away, the system he allegedly helped engineer is still alive. Executives who celebrated with him, agents who smoothed deals, lawyers who erased contracts, stylists, assistants, security staff, all playing their part in keeping the gears turning. His sentencing in October is being packaged as a final chapter. But what if it's not an ending at all? What if it's only the first episode of a much darker story? And that brings us back to Warner's last days. On the surface, Keshia Knight Pulliam's tribute to him sounded tender and loving. She wrote, "We got our girls. I just needed a moment." But read closer and the words carry more weight. That doesn't sound like simple mourning. It feels like coded pain, the kind of heartbreak you hear from someone who witnessed something unfold, knowing they couldn't stop it. Keshia Knight Pulliam and Warner shared decades of friendship, and she had been a guest on his podcast only weeks before his death. The question now is, did she catch something in his tone? Did she sense the weight of what he wasn't saying? Some people are revisiting Pulliam's Instagram posts, not just as tributes, but as possible coded messages. Her repeated emphasis on our girls has sparked speculation that Warner may have been trying to shield not only his own daughter, but hers as well, from something he feared was coming. Family friends say Warner's behavior in the weeks leading up to his passing had noticeably shifted. He became more protective, quietly canceling public appearances, cutting back on social events, and even insisting on private security for a gathering that had always been casual before. These aren't the choices of a man carefree on vacation. They look more like the careful steps of someone who felt the walls closing in. And as one prosecutor bluntly framed it in court, the question is he a criminal? Is he essentially a mob boss running several criminal enterprises? The defense argued otherwise, but the line stuck, because it suggested that even within the legal system, the idea of something bigger, more organized, and more dangerous was being wrestled with. Sources close to Warner's household add another layer. They whisper about private conversations, quiet warnings, and mentions of feeling watched. According to one confidant, who asked not to be named, Warner had even considered stepping back from public life entirely by year's end. His plan, they said, was to focus on being a father and retreat from the spotlight altogether. If true, that choice hints at a man preparing for something, or someone, he no longer trusted. And that raises a chilling thought. Warner's last days may not have been filled with simple family outings and podcast planning. They may have been shadowed by fear. What makes it even more unsettling is how firmly his inner circle has locked down since his passing. No interviews, no public reflections. Many who once stood openly by his side have gone completely silent. In the days after Warner's death, even those closest to him pulled back. Friends who had once been vocal on social media went silent. Even Keshia Knight Pulliam, usually open and warm with her followers, has limited herself to brief, heartfelt captions, no names, no details, just quiet restraint, and that kind of restraint often suggests something unspoken. If Warner did share his fears privately, and if those who loved him are now carrying the burden of what he didn't get the chance to say out loud, then his passing becomes more than just a personal tragedy. Between the lines, it starts to feel like a warning. Meanwhile, disturbing revelations are surfacing in the opening days of the Diddy trial. And let's be honest, no, one is shocked that the man has a dark side. But what's haunting is the timing. The very same week Warner's podcast teased deeper conversations about exploitation in the industry, Diddy's lawyers were filing motions to shorten his jail time. They argued he was being unfairly punished for so-called private, consensual arrangements. But when you dig into the evidence prosecutors submitted, the picture looks far uglier. According to testimony, there were patterns of coercion, manipulation, and an unsettling level of control over the people closest to him. Two women described being pushed into staged scenarios designed for show, not consent. A security video showed violence in plain sight. One federal investigator even called it corporate-level manipulation disguised as entertainment. Now imagine if Warner knew more about those operations than he ever let on. Not because he was involved, but because he saw things. Maybe at parties, maybe through friends. Or maybe someone trusted him enough to confide in him, believing Theo Huxtable, the reliable big brother of television, would never betray them. But here's the problem. What happens when the man known for trust and integrity suddenly becomes a liability? One producer who worked with Warner on a sitcom reboot back in 2011 recalled Warner casually mentioning Diddy, saying, "He's got too many people." When Warner once mentioned Diddy in passing, saying he had too many people watching people, it didn't come across as an accusation, more like an observation. But looking back now, that offhand remark carries a heavier weight, especially when we consider that several of Diddy's alleged accomplices, the ones prosecutors say helped coordinate those infamous freak-off encounters, haven't even been charged. They're walking free without so much as an ankle monitor. If Warner had any first-hand knowledge about who some of those names might be, that's a clear motive for silencing him. And let's be honest, the details coming out of this trial are disturbing. We're being dragged through the ugliest corners of Diddy's world. It's dark, it's seedy, and it's depraved. The man has no grace, no kindness, and, at least in the eyes of many, no conscience. Adding to the unease, multiple court watchers noticed that Warner's name appeared quietly in pretrial documents that were never made public. One paralegal claimed his name showed up during a metadata sweep connected to digital correspondence reviewed in the investigation. The prosecution hasn't confirmed or denied it, but it raises serious questions. What was Warner's true proximity to all of this? Was he simply a bystander brushing against the edges, or was he on the verge of becoming a crucial witness? Then comes the strange behavior from Hollywood's gatekeepers, the quiet unfollowing on social media, the cryptic tributes. One veteran stylist who had worked with both Warner and Diddy posted nothing more than a single candle emoji with the words, "Not unexpected, but still hurts." Within hours, the post vanished. No names, no explanations, but the implication was loud and clear. And meanwhile, online chatter keeps growing, linking even Warner's podcast recordings have fueled suspicion. One of the most recent uploads contained odd audio distortions and missing timestamps, leaving fans to wonder if portions were altered after his passing. Rumors quickly spread that Warner's family had recovered files from his personal laptop, files that allegedly pointed to a list of collaborators he no longer trusted. No one has seen the contents firsthand, but multiple gossip forums claim those names, if true, would shake 3 major networks to their core. And that leads to one chilling possibility. Warner wasn't caught up in this mess by chance. He was targeted. As Diddy's empire began to crumble, Warner may have been seen as an open tab, one that needed to be closed. Not because he had done anything criminal himself, but because he might have been ready to testify against those who had. If that's true, then the question becomes, who else could be on that list? It's a bitter reality to face. The good guys don't always make it out. The voices we've trusted can be silenced in an instant. And the people pulling the strings behind the curtain, they know how to wait, how to pivot, how to rebuild their power even after the walls start closing in. So we're left asking, if Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death wasn't an accident, who could be next? What truths are still hiding in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered? Before they're silenced too, drop your thoughts below and remember, hold your heroes close. The storm isn't over. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep watching.